Well, that's quite a mouthful, I realize, but I hope that you have found this at least provocative. And so I'll entertain any questions or comments you have about this first most important objection.
So we do have one from online, and it's from Nate. He says, according to the definitions, would the Christian anthropological monist / physicalist also be classified as substance dualists because they believe God is immaterial?
Yes, I think that would be fair to say that a person who has an orthodox concept of God is a substance dualist, but he's not an anthropological dualist. Mm-hmm. He is a materialist when it comes to human beings, but he believes that there is this divine immaterial substance who has created the world. Now that might seem in tension, I think, to many of us, but it's not inconsistent, and it's very helpful for us in considering divine incorporeality, because, as I say, it means that the vast majority of arguments against anthropological dualism just don't apply to divine incorporeality because they're atomist in nature. They're saying you don't need the soul to explain the cognitive sciences, and that's irrelevant to divine incorporeality.
So, given that you mentioned certain physicalists don't necessarily deny mental states, just mental substances.
Yes.
Would that be forms of emergence?
Yes. The question is, what about these non-reductive physicalists who recognize that there are mental states, but they don't believe that there are mental substances? He says this could include emergentist views of the mind, and that's right, it could. That what emerges... No, I don't think Bill Hasker would fall into that, even though he's an emergentist. I think Hasker would say what emerges is a mental substance that is distinct from the body and uses the body as a mechanism for thought. But other emergentists might be in the physicalist camp where they would say what simply emerges is this epiphenomenon of states of mental awareness that are properly states of the brain, and there is no real mental substance here.
Kim, one of those?
Who?
Kim?
Oh, Jaegwon Kim?
Yeah, doesn't that kind of describe him?
Yes, I think he would be a non-reductive physicalist.
Right, one more question from the online audience from Leonard Kraft. Epistemic origin stories sound a whole lot like the genetic fallacy. How would explaining how a person came to hold some belief serve to undermine EAACCP?
The idea here is that if you could have a justifiably believed epistemic origin story that showed your faculties to be reliable, then that would deflect a potential defeater from defeating the belief. And an analogy that Planting and Moon often use would be an example of, say, a drug that induces color blindness in 95% of the people who ingest it. And suppose you learn that your dinner that you just ate had this drug in it and you've ingested it. You would now have a defeater for your belief in the colored objects around you. And no matter how vivid they appeared to you, no matter how clear it was that they are of the different colors, that wouldn't defeat the defeater because your perceptions are already defeated by the belief that you've ingested a drug that distorts the color vision of 95% of the people. And so you can't get a defeater of that defeater. But now suppose that before you eat dinner, a medical doctor gives you a blood test and shows that you are immune to the drug so that it won't affect you. And then after eating the dinner, you learn that your dinner was tainted with this drug that affects 95% of people's color vision. Now you see you have a defeater deflector for your the defeat of your color vision, because you have an epistemic origin story about how you came by your color vision beliefs that makes it immune to the potential defeater. Given that your blood test shows that you're immune to the drug, and you took the drug, and the drug blurs the color vision of most people, you don't have a defeater for your color vision, right? Because you've got this epistemic origin story that is justifiably believed and it's reliability promoting. And so think of that analogy and then ask yourself, what epistemic origin story could the materialist evolutionist provide that would make our beliefs reliability promoting? And it's really hard to see what he could offer for this, because the evolutionary account just is an epistemic origin story about how we come to have our beliefs.
Yeah, online they said that was really helpful. So,
Oh, good.
do we have one more in class?
Grace.
Given the limits of the human mind to arrive at 100% accuracy about God's attributes, how important is it that the object of God created in our minds matches the actual attributes of God we've been discussing? Said another way, to what extent are truly God-seeking humans punishable or responsible for any discrepancies therein between the object they've created
Yeah.
and the actual that we're...
The question from Grace was, how critical is it that this concept of God that we're crafting correspond to reality, that really is the way God is? Might we be punished or in some way disciplined by God for having an incorrect concept? And what I want to say is that it's very important that we get the concept of God right, because that helps to put us in touch with reality about the way God is. And so we want to examine scriptural teaching as best we can, and then look at the philosophical and theological arguments for the attribute in question and attempt to formulate it coherently. But having said that, Grace, no one is going to be punished for having an incorrect concept of these various attributes of God. We're saved by grace through faith in Christ's redeeming death on our behalf, and we certainly are dealing here with the very limits of our cognitive capacities. And although, for example, I believe that God is in time since the moment of creation, I could be wrong about that. And though I think that God transcends space, I might be wrong about that. Maybe God does fill all of space in the way that a mereologically simple object does, that he's wholly present at every region in space. And that's just fine. You know, when I get to heaven and understand fully, even as I'm fully understood, I will rejoice to shed my blinders and my errors and to discover the way God really is. So there's absolutely no fear in this of making mistakes. We know we all make mistakes, and we're not saved by our theology, but by our faith in the redemptive work of Christ. Yes?
Hunter, something that whenever I read the Plantinga's argument that I struggle with is, where does he, like, you imagine somebody who argues back from usefulness and says that we've come to certain beliefs because they're useful, and that therefore they've led us to some sort of correspondence of truth and of the reality that we live in. So where does Plantinga draw the line to say what beliefs we can know or what we cannot know?
I'm not sure that you're following Plantinga's argument. Plantinga is not a skeptic in any way. He thinks that it's the naturalist who believes in the causal closure of the physical that is in real trouble here. But Plantinga believes that our mental states are causally efficacious and
Well, I'm
do.
saying, how would he respond to the naturalist who says that? Because I know that Plantinga would say that that's not.
Oh, he thinks that the naturalist is hopelessly lost in a self-defeating position, and it's impossible to extricate himself from it. This is the really interesting thing about Plantinga's argument is, it's not as though the naturalist can look at the premises of Plantinga's argument and say, oh man, I was wrong. I was embracing a self-defeating position. I'm going to change my mind now. Why can't he do that? Because he can't believe what his cognitive faculties tell him about Plantinga's argument. You see, so he's mired in self-defeat. He cannot reason himself out of this dilemma. Plantinga says the only way the naturalist can escape is by having some sort of a conversion experience where he just sheds naturalism and gets rid of it. So Plantinga says in this case, as in salvation, he says salvation is by grace, not by works. You can't reason yourself out of the naturalist predicament, which is
Hunter?
really ironic.
Hunter, I think I understand what your objection is, and I think Stephen Law and some other people have forwarded a kind of a similar objection where it's like the beliefs that we have that have been given to us through evolution, they seem useful, and so because they are so advantageous to, like, say, to find water, right? That's necessary for our survival. Because that would be a sort of useful thing to believe, then it's very likely that our beliefs would be truth tracking given naturalism.
I'm not saying that. I'm saying, where does Plantinga draw the line? I think Plantinga's lines, like, I just want to know where.
The line on what? I just don't understand your question.
Like, if somebody is hungry and then they eat food, they find some sort of truth that the food nourishes them, something like that.
He would have no basis for believing that this is going to nourish me. His cognitive faculties aren't reliable. All that matters is that he eats the nourishing food, whatever he believes. He could believe, oh, look at this. This is poisonous. This is going to kill me if I eat it. And then he feels good because it is nourishing. It doesn't matter what he believes. All that matters is what he does. And because that's all evolution selects for. It selects for behavior, not for the content of your beliefs. Because those are mental and therefore causally effete. They have no impact on the evolutionary process. So it's a desperate, desperate situation if Plantinga is right about this.
I think Plantinga actually offers an example to defend his argument of a deer seeing a lion or something and
Yes.
believing. And so he basically points out that even if he believes that petting the lion is going to save his life, but the behavior forces him to run, then evolution would still favor the running, even though his beliefs, and therefore there's no correlation between the beliefs and the behaviors in the evolutionary argument against naturalism.
That's exactly right. And that was what I was trying to illustrate with the food poison illustration. You might look at the lion and think, oh, what a fuzzy, wonderful kitty. He's so nice. But as long as you run the other way,
Right.
you have survival value. It doesn't matter what you believe.
Okay, someone asked, would you be able to give an example of a defeater deflector?
Yes, the example of the dinner with the poison or the drug in it for the
colorblind
loss of color vision. The defeater deflector would be that you remember that prior to the dinner, your medical doctor friend gave you a blood test and showed that you are immune to this drug. And so the conjunction of that belief with the belief that your dinner was tainted and the belief that the drug prevents correct color vision in 95% of the people who ingest it would still leave you in a position of believing that your color vision is reliable.
Just to follow up.
Hunter?
So I just wanted to clarify on that. So he would say that you can't have any beliefs. As a naturalist, you wouldn't be able to.
Yeah, all of your
That's
beliefs.
All I'm trying to figure out is where he drew the line. It's all beliefs.
It's
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's everything.
Including the belief in naturalism.
Yes, yeah. And as I say, the paradoxical thing is that the naturalist can't come to see his mistake by means of reasoning, because everything is defeated, even his perception of planning his argument.
So a question from Dan Miller online from the online auditors, and this is related to the one that I thought Hunter was raising. He says, I know this is a common objection to EAAN, but I still struggle to understand why the naturalist cannot say that our cognitive faculties haven't evolved to determine truth, since truth has survival value.
Because truth doesn't have survival value. The truth of your beliefs is irrelevant. The key here is the causal closure of the physical. Doesn't matter if your beliefs are true or false.
Behavior, beliefs.
Yeah, everything is behavior. Everything is
There's no
behavior.
correlation necessarily between behavior and beliefs.
Yeah.
Any other questions in studio?
Yeah, this is like a different subject, but
Aaron, right?
yes.
Yes.
You rejected the idealist view on the basis of the Bible elevating the body.
Yeah.
Couldn't the idealist just say that what the biblical authors were concerned with was bodily reality, whatever that may be, and then the idealist says, it turns out that's mental at bottom.
Yeah.
It seems like it would be hard to say that the biblical authors were really commenting.
He wants to know whether or not Christian idealism isn't really a defensible point of view, even though I questioned it biblically. There are certainly Christian idealists. I mean, there is a strong tradition of Christian idealism. But I must say that it seems to me to be a step in the direction of Gnosticism, in contrast to a Hebrew view of the world, which affirms so strongly the goodness of the material world that God has created. The creation account in Genesis 1 is of how God creates a material world which is distinct from himself, and that this is good. And the doctrines of the incarnation and the resurrection, especially the resurrection of Jesus, shows that the human body and materiality is valuable to human persons. And so, I mean, it may not be a knockdown argument, but it does seem to me that a Hebrew view of reality is one that affirms the reality and the worth of the material, and that therefore we ought not to give that up unless we had really compelling arguments to do so. And I'm trying to argue that we don't have compelling arguments for that.
I have class with an idealist tonight.
Did you? My college professor and later colleague, Stuart Hackett, was actually an idealist. He thought that reality was all mental in nature, ultimately.
Josh Rasmussen is an
Oh, no,
idealist.
really?
He is.
Really? Wow.
Michael Jones.
Michael Jones.
Okay, but he calls himself a objective idealist. That at the bottom it's all mental reality, but there is an objective world for us to study. I'm not
Yeah.
sure how he, synthesizes that.
We have a question online from Robert Forrest. He says, regarding page 27, footnote 65, what is the definition of, or an example of, a common skeptical threat argument?
Oh, okay. Yeah, this is Hasker's characterization of planning as EAAN, the idea that it ultimately lands us in skepticism, as we were ultimately saying, that this argument shows that you are stuck or mired in skepticism. Andrew Moon would call these global debunking arguments, that all of your faculties are debunked and shown to be unreliable. And Hasker doesn't like to think of the argument from reason, as he calls it, as an argument that you're going to be threatened with skepticism. Rather, he wants to present the argument as a best explanation argument. Given that our faculties are reliable, as we recognize they are reliable, what's the best explanation of that? And he would argue that theism gives the best explanation for the reliability of our cognitive faculties. And as I say here, it seems to me that although it may be true that dualism interactionism gives a better explanation of the reliability of our faculties, I think the skeptical threat or global debunking argument is just even more devastating against naturalism or the causal closure of the physical.
Was that Hasker or Moon you said gives that as an inference to the best explanation?
Yes, that's Hasker. Hasker,
Where did he write that?
that's in his book, The Emergent Self. Footnote 65 footnotes him on page 68. I think Vic Reppert is another Christian philosopher who would interpret the argument similarly, that you begin with the reliability of our cognitive faculties and ask what is the best explanation for the reliability of our cognitive faculties. It's kind of not dissimilar, Dave, to different approaches to the moral argument. You know, whether you say that in the absence of God, there are no objective moral values and duties, or whether you begin with the objectivity of moral values and duties and say, well, what's the best explanation for this? It's theism. So the argument can be run different ways, but I think, as Moon argues, that as a global debunking argument, this is especially powerful and directly pertinent to the objection to divine incorporeality based upon the causal closure of the physical, which I do not think has been heretofore appreciated in the philosophical literature. Yes, Grace.
Where is Jesus' body now?
Where is Jesus' body now? This is a great question. The doctrine of the resurrection and the bodily ascension shows that the incarnation of the second person of the Trinity was not merely a transitory state confined to Jesus' earthly existence. Rather, it is a permanent state of the second person of the Trinity, which, as I say, is an affirmation of the value of the body and of materiality and the importance of the body for full humanity like nothing else, well, hang on, that I can conceive of. However, where is his body then today? Some people might think, well, heaven is another spatial dimension into which he exists, and his body exists there in a spatially extended and material way in that other dimension. I'm not persuaded that that's the best view. I think it's very difficult to conceive of the sort of extra spatial dimensions which would contain Christ's risen and ascended body. And theologically, Paul says to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. He says, I long to go and be with Christ, for that is far better. So the soul, or rather the state of the disembodied souls of the righteous dead is co-presence and communion with Christ, which is rather difficult to conceive of if he's a material being. So I'm more inclined to say this, that when Jesus ascended into heaven, he exited our four-dimensional space-time continuum, and therefore his human nature only manifests itself as a human body when he is present in our space-time continuum. So when he comes again, at the second coming, Christ re-enters our four-dimensional space-time continuum, and boom, every eye will see him, everyone that pierced him. And his human nature, which he still has, will be manifested in a corporeal way. An analogy to help visualize this would be a tuning fork that, when plucked, creates a hum that you can hear. But now, if you place that vibrating tuning fork in a vacuum jar, there is no medium for the sound waves. And therefore, even though it's vibrating still, it hasn't changed its nature. It doesn't manifest itself as a sound. But take away the vacuum jar and let there be a medium for the manifestation of the sound, and you will again hear the hum of the tuning fork. And I think that that is a nice analogy to Christ's risen and ascended human nature. It isn't in the medium now that manifests itself as a corporeal body, because it's not in space, and at least in physical time. But when he comes again, then I think it will be. So that's the way I think of it.
Okay, we have a question online from Dan Miller. I've spoken with atheists who just think the idea of God's immateriality is incoherent. They don't seem to be able to even grasp even the idea that something can be immaterial. Any thoughts on how to approach this?
Well, just to demand an argument from the fellow. It's not enough for him to just say, I can't imagine it. He needs to give some reason. There's nothing inconceivable, I think, about immaterial objects. Naturalists, as I mentioned, like Quine and others, believe in immaterial objects like numbers, propositions, possible worlds, sets. Now, those are abstract objects, but nevertheless, they're immaterial objects that many of these naturalists believe exist. So he's got to do more than that. He's got to give us some kind of an argument as to why the idea of a mental substance is incoherent. That's a strong claim, and there's nothing apparently incoherent about saying that there are mental substances or immaterial substances.
You skipped over this, but I found it very intriguing, the logos concept of Jesus, the way Philo interacted with that. I've been studying on that myself a little bit for my thesis, so I just had a question about something you said. As a Jewish monotheist, Philo thinks that this intelligible world exists as contents of the divine mind. So would that categorize Philo? It seems to me it categorizes Philo into maybe an idealist. Would he have been an idealist?
So the question was, is Philo of Alexandria an idealist because he thought the world exists in the mind of the Logos? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, Philo thinks that this intelligible world exists as contents of the divine mind.
The answer is no. Philo and other Middle Platonists believed that the Platonic realm of the ideas exists in the mind of the Logos. And they called this the cosmos noetos, or the intelligible or conceptual world. It's the divine ideas that serve as the blueprint or pattern on which physical objects are constructed. So in addition to the cosmos noetos that exists in the Logos, the conceptual realm, there exists the cosmos oratos, the visible cosmos, which is the physical world of objects that we can perceive and interact with. And this is, I think, directly applicable to the argument from mathematics, that the applicability of mathematics in the physical realm is best explained by anchoring it in the mind of the Logos, who created the physical world on the mathematical blueprint in his mind. So Philo would be a substance dualist. He simply thought that the conceptual realm of the ideas exists in the mind of the Logos, where it served as the paradigm and pattern for the physical world that God then created through the Logos. And it may well be the case, as I indicate in the notes, that John or the author of the prologue to the Gospel of John may have believed something similar.